In this video I'll give you the top 11 progressions in Sega Genesis games. The Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive as it was known outside of North America, was a 16-bit video game console released in the late 80s and early 90s. If like me you grew up with the Mega Drive, you'll have some of the distinctive soundtracks from these games permanently etched on your memory. But these tunes aren't just great for a nostalgia trip, they are also good songs in their own right, and there's a lot to learn from these catchy and memorable compositions. I analysed the music of over 50 of the biggest selling Mega Drive games and a handful of personal favourites in order to discover the chord progressions that lay beneath. Let's check out the result of this work now. Examples will be presented in HookPad, a link is in the description below. 4 major 7, 3 minor 7, 2 minor 7, 1 major 7. This is a nice simple descending major key progression. The use of major and minor 7th chords provide a smooth, wistful sound. Examples of this progression can be found in the original Sonic the Hedgehog game, in particular the first level, Green Hill Zone, and the Labyrinth Zone. You can also hear it in the Mickey Mania game on the Steamboat Willie level. Next up is another major key example, 1 major 7th, 2 minor 7th, 3 minor 7th, 4 major 7th. This is the perfect reversal of our first progression. Listen to the rising nature that starting with the 1 chord brings in this instance. Putting chords in order like this is also known as the escalator effect. A beautiful example of this can be heard in the Starlight Zone level of the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Another variation on the first two progressions now, with 1, 4 major 7th, 3, 2. This progression uses the same 4 chords we've seen so far, but in another order. It's always worth moving chords around in any of your progressions, as you can often get more mileage out of them and create something that sounds the same but different. Find an example of this progression in the game Shining Force 2. Onto some more exotic major key progressions now, starting with 1, flat 7, 4, 5. This progression uses the flat 7 chord. This is one way of dealing with the dissonant diminished 7 chord in major keys. You take the root note of the diminished chord, drop it by half a step or semitone, and then construct a major triad from this new root note. You can also think of it as being borrowed from the parallel minor key. This progression can be heard in the theme to the iconic Altered Beast. Here's another progression that uses the flat 7 chord, but this time in the Lydian mode. 1, 2, flat 7, 6. The flat 7 chord here is constructed in the same way, but the original 7 chord is a minor chord. You'll find flattened chords like this constructed from diminished and minor chords, particularly in major keys. Hear this progression in action in the first level of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Emerald Hill Zone. Next up is another major key example, using a flattened chord and a secondary dominant. It's 1, 5 of 6, 6, flat 6. This progression uses a secondary dominant chord. I won't go into detail about them here, There's a link in the description for a full explanation of these useful chords. The flattened chord here is a flat 6. This example can be found in the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 level, Casino Night Zone. Turn to the dark side now and some minor key chord progressions. Beat 'em up and fighting games were extremely popular on the Mega Drive. Bringing the excitement of the arcade into the living room had huge appeal in the early 90s. To this end, our first minor key progression is 1, 6, 7, 5. Popular minor progression more generally, you can hear the different feel that this has to our previous progressions. You'll hear this punching classic in Guile's theme from Street Fighter 2 and the theme to Eternal Champions. Another fatal progression now with 1, 7, 3. This featured in the theme of the daddy of violent video games, Mortal Kombat. This song is also known as Techno Syndrome. A popular technique in minor/Aeolian keys is to play the 5 chord as a major chord. You can also think of this as a borrowed chord from the parallel major key. Examples of this are in loads of Mega Drive game tunes, including the progression 1, 6, 1, 6, 4, major 5, 1. This features in the opening theme of the cult classic and personal favourite, Splatterhouse 2. Up next is another example of the major 5 chord, 1, major 5, 1, 6, 1, 4. Waddle along to this progression in the plunger-themed platformer Quackshot. Mega Drive music sometimes strays beyond major and minor keys. We saw the Lydian mode example of Emerald Hill Zone earlier. There are also great examples in the Dorian mode. Before we look at that, I want to make a few notable mentions to games that didn't make this list of progressions, but which I was a big fan of in my younger years. This includes Kid Chameleon, the virtual reality mask-swapping classic platformer that had a range of interesting tunes, Cyborg Justice, the limb-changing side-scroll and beat-em-up, and General Chaos, the satirical arcade-style strategy game. Back to the chords. In at 1 is the Dorian progression 1, 3, 7, 1. This progression can be found in the Buttville level of the brilliant run and gun platformer Earthworm Jim. You've spent all day playing video games and missed your lectures. Watch the video on screen now to catch up and learn 10 modal key chord progressions.